Welcome, initiates and masters alike, to Eldritch Lit 101. Today we'll be discussing Symbaroum, which is published by Free League Publishing and originally was published in 2016. It is a dark fantasy role-playing game that uses a roll-low d20 system and that I have been jamming for over a year now. It's an incredibly immersive story that gives you mystery, political intrigue, exploration, fast-paced combat, and just honestly is immensely gratifying. Alright, let me give you a little bit of the background on Symbaroum without going too much into it and without giving away any spoilers. So, Symbaroum has a human kingdom in it who once lived across a mountain range and whose lands were absolutely decimated by war and dark lords and therefore corrupting the entire land. The humans ended up winning that war, but it's a pirate victory. Doing so cost them immensely. The queen became scarred, and the lands themselves became scarred with corruption. They then decided to travel across this mountain range back to their ancestral lands in order to reclaim the ancient city, which you will find out is called Symbaroum, that lives deep within the forest of Davakar. However, an iron pact made with elves seems to be preventing the humans from doing just that. The humans believe that there is power within the forest that will help them to gain power and to keep any new threats completely at bay. But each faction within the human realm, the elven realm, and multiple other races within Symbaroum have different views and ideas on what should happen with the forest, what should happen with the kingdom, and how they should progress. All the while, you as adventurers have to mitigate between those different factions' viewpoints with your own viewpoints and the adventures in which the Game Master sets you upon. Alright, now let's get into a slight overview of the mechanics, which I find to be extremely intuitive and noob-friendly. Just like other role-playing games, Symbaroum gives you attributes, which are how your character is defined, how they interact with the environment, how they interact with other characters within the game, and how their abilities work within combat. In Symbaroum, you have 8 attributes: accurate, cunning, discreet, persuasive, quick, resolute, strong, and vigilant. And your success and failure is determined by how low you roll underneath these attributes. These attributes rank from 6 to 15 based on how you create your character and what attributes you want to define them. When you roll the die, which is a d20 since it's a d20 system, your goal is to roll underneath your score modified by either the enemy's defense or enemy's attribute that is related to the power that you're using, or it's modified by a difficulty level that's given to you by the Game Master. This makes for a very easy, very intuitive way to play the game. Unlike other games like Dungeons & Dragons, where you roll a d20 and then you have multiple modifiers that get added to that roll, instead the modifiers just go straight to that attribute and then you roll underneath said attribute. This also helps to give some roleplay to your actions, since you don't have to wait for the DM to confirm that you did or did not make the roll. Instead, you know automatically whether or not you rolled underneath the attribute, since the modifier is given to you before you even roll. Unlike other role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, where as your character levels up, you get different abilities and powers that are assigned to that class, in this game, you don't particularly have a class. Instead, you gain experience for every scene that you complete. Those experience points are used then to buy different powers and abilities. You can get them at 3 different levels: the Novice, Adept, or Master level, each costing a certain amount based off of that level. 10 for the Novice, 20 for the Adept, and then 30 for the Master, and it will stack up. So in order to get a Master level ability, you will have to have spent 60 experience points. So this allows for a very deep and very unique class build. You can make a variety of different characters using different combinations of abilities that are available within the game. Magic is also handled uniquely within the Symbaroum system. You are only limited by your resolute score and your corruption threshold, which corruption threshold happens to be half of your resolute score. You can cast to your heart's desire any mystical power you want. However, beware. For every single cast that you make with a mystical power, you get 1 to 1d4 in temporary corruption. Exceed your threshold, and you will gain a permanent corruption. Gain enough of temporary and permanent corruptions to exceed your resolute, and you would become a bloodthirsty abomination, and it is game over for you, friend, as well as now your party's going to have to put you down. That's enough for the overview. What makes this game worth playing? To me, it's an extremely immersive setting, and it is shrouded in mystery. It wants to pull you in to discover all the incredible details that they have within the game, be it intrigue, be it exploration, or even discovering new monsters and new scenery. It just wants you to discover that, and it keeps everything behind the scenes extremely shrouded in a mysterious and dark nature, so that you're constantly on your toes. Also, what makes this story or role-playing game so incredibly good is that choices matter. No choice feels superficial. If you make one faction angry, that will follow you throughout the book as long as you play that character. If you decide to go swords drawn into a situation that could easily be handled by diplomacy, you will find yourself in a situation that will be very difficult to come out of. And it won't be just that situation. It's not forgotten at that point. Characters will remember. The story will remember. If you decide not to go somewhere and to do something, there will be consequences. Every choice that you make in this game is extremely critical, and it makes it so much more rewarding as a player to know that everything you decide to do has an impact on the game. And it's written straight into the adventure books to be that way. It's not just a DM or a game master in the way that they are playing, but it is the way that the game is actually built. Characters in this game are also not superheroes. Unlike power fantasies like Dungeons and Dragons and some other role-playing games, you will not feel as if your character is just out there with these immense powers, although there are some really nice and mystical powers that you can have as a player, but you will still feel as if your character will struggle, and that's a good thing. This game wants you to know that you are just a person going against a massive enemy or a massive world, and it wants you to feel as if maybe you're not a superhero and just blowing through every single encounter. Also, the system itself promotes roleplay. It's extremely easy to learn, and the system itself is a little bit on the light side, though still complex enough to give you some gratification. Other combat systems, sometimes the exchanges can be very mechanical and number-driven. In the way of when you roll a dice, you add the modifier, you give that number to your game master, he confirms whether it hit or miss, and then you roll more dice, and then you give more numbers. In this game, since the modifier is given to you before you even make a dice roll, when you do make that dice roll, you know already whether you hit or you miss. So your description of your hit or miss can be done very descriptively on how you hit or how you miss, which adds to the flavor of the combat immensely. Also, the combat itself is extremely fast and unpredictable. In my experience, other game systems, sometimes the combat can just drag on. sometimes lasting for hours, sometimes even sessions. In this game, I have yet to see a combat last more than 1 hour. But that doesn't mean that's boring. The game itself is unpredictable. You could be full of health 1 second, and then the next second you are on the floor bleeding out. And that's because your health does not scale as you gain experience in this game. The only thing that you have to mitigate that is through abilities. So the swings in this game are immense, and therefore keeping you on your toes. And it feels extremely deadly at all times, which is great. Also, this game promotes theater of the mind. Since there are no scales, there are no grid movements, there are no ranges for your weapons and powers. Instead, everything is based on line of sight, or it is about a meaningful movement. So all you have to do to move is say, I make a meaningful movement towards this location, or object, or person, and then you use whatever action you want to attack or interact with that thing in the environment. Which is great for those people that don't have a lot of money to sink into minis and maps and such. However, it can still be used with those things if you do already have those or you prefer minis. However, it's just not required. Unlike other games where I feel it's almost a necessity, like Dungeons and Dragons. Also, this game is easy to learn. It's not extremely complex, although it can be deep, especially when it comes to character creation. You have a lot of combinations and unique builds that you can create through buying each individual ability and power piecemeal. Unlike some of the builds that you can get from other games where you have a flowchart in classes. Where each class has a very specific thing they're going to get at a very specific level. In this game, whatever experience you can afford, or whatever power you can afford with the experience that you have, is the build that you can make. And it makes for a very unique character and very unique roleplay. You're probably sitting there thinking, this can't all be good. And you're right, there are some flaws. For one, this game has a lot of roleplay. And if you don't like roleplay, this is probably not the game for you. In fact, this game actively punishes players who try to murder their way through encounters. In fact, some of the most crucial abilities and powers in the game actually help in roleplay more than they do in combat, if they help in combat at all. There are a multitude of powers, like Lore Master, Beast Lore. There's rituals allow you to speak to the dead, and see scenes through smoke that may have been captured, kind of like a photograph of anybody speaking around the fire. These abilities are absolutely necessary for your party to be able to get to whatever the end goal is for that adventure. And without them, your party would struggle significantly. So in this game, it's not just fun to roleplay, it is almost necessary and required to roleplay. On top of that, another flaw is that even though I said your characters aren't supposed to be superheroes in this game, it does suffer from some balancing issues. There are some powers and abilities in combination that can make your character extremely overpowered. And that could seem like a detriment. As I said before, you're not supposed to be like that in this game. This game is supposed to make you feel as if you're not overpowered. However, keep in mind, for any of you game masters out there, if your players are overpowered, the NPCs, they use the exact same abilities and exact same powers as your players. So if they come up with a unique and powerful build that uses some of the powers and abilities in a combination that creates something that is just insanely overpowered, that NPC can do the exact same thing. Put that against your party, and I'm sure they will come to regret their decision. Alright, so we talked a little bit about the player's perspective, but how about the game masters? Well, for one, I feel like most game masters like roleplay. As stated before, this has heavy roleplay. And so game masters get to interact with those players that sometimes in other games they feel a loss for, and they're the only ones making descriptions. In this game, the roleplay has to happen on the player's side, and therefore, to me, it promotes the fun of the game master because it allows the game master more opportunities for those great roleplay moments. Another thing, game masters don't roll die in this game at all. In combat, all dice rolls are handled by the players. If they want to make a defense, it is a defense roll modified by the attack stat of the enemy. If they're making an attack roll, it is an attack roll modified by the defense stat of the enemy. All of that is done on that side of the table, so you as the GM can worry about managing the game, doing the role play, and everything else you have to do as a game master without hunting dice. And to me, that's a major plus. Also, the adventure books are extremely well written, which is a huge benefit for those game masters that might not have all the free time in the world to homebrew a campaign. And to be honest, there are a lot of campaigns out there written by other studios and other publishers that don't quite do it. However, this game does. This game is very well written. The depth of the lore, intrigue, and choices that it gives you is just amazing. However, that does require a decent amount of prep that I believe other pre-made adventures demand. Because of the amount of different choices, and because of the different factions that are vying for power, and all the lore that is in this game, you have to do a lot of reading. You have to make sure that you know what your characters or players are going to want to do. And it will take a decent amount of time to make sure all of that flows really well. And you have those answers for things that your character is going to ask about because they want to know about the lore, and it is going to be needed for them to accomplish the goals for their party. So you have to be able to give those answers. And it can be a lot of work. But I think that if you are used to making your own homebrew campaigns, that amount of time is negligible. Because half the work is done for you. All the world building is there. All the lore is there. You just have to read it. That's all I have for Symbaroum. But don't just take my word for it. Get out there yourself and explore Davocard's dangers. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. See you next time at Eldritch Lit 101. May the fates be kind to you, and happy gaming.